has started. Hello, hello, hello. This is Helen Thomas and the CDFM study group. Today we're going to continue a review of CDFM Module 1, Competency 2, which is Manpower Management. However, before we begin, I always like to review some of the key concepts that we discussed last week in Module 1.1. So as you're studying, this is exactly what you need to do. Do not separate the material. So what that means is you don't just pick up Manpower Management today and forget everything that you went over last week. You want to try to tie that information back in together. So I can do it. At first, I'll ask the questions. I'll pause for a few minutes to allow you an opportunity to answer the question. If you can't, then I'll answer so we can move on. All right, so government resource management environment. What was the precursor to the Constitution? Pronounce my word. All right, anybody know what was the precursor to the Constitution? You are correct if you're thinking it. It was the Articles of Confederation. All right, so the Constitution is broken up into various articles. First, I want you to tell me, someone to tell me, what are the three branches of government? That separation of power means that we have three branches of government. What are the three branches of government?
Legislative, judicial, and executive.
Okay, you are correct. However, was that the order you should learn them? Right? What is the proper order? You should learn them.
Legislative, executive, and judicial.
Okay, so you want to learn them: legislative, executive, judicial. All right, is that Michelle? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yes, that's it.
Okay, Michelle. All right, so tell them why you want to learn them in that order.
Well, I think for, oh, you're fine. I think for legislative, that's the highest level. And then the breakdown goes after that. Then you've got your executive, and then you've got your judicial.
Okay, that's one way of looking at it. And actually, you're correct. And so both of you are correct. It's just when it comes to this exam, the way in which you learn something will also help you to recall it when it's time to take the exam. All right, I'll take one more response. Why do we want to learn the three branches of government in the order of legislative, executive, and judicial? I give one more person an opportunity.
It corresponds to Article
Jordan?
1, 2, and 3.
Perfect. So I'm real simple. The main reason is it directly corresponds to the Constitution. Article 1 goes to legislative, Article 2 goes to executive, and Article 3 goes to judicial. So it makes it easier for you to recall if you're reading a multiple choice question and it starts talking about under Article 2, this branch of government is allowed to do XYZ, then you automatically know that Article 2 goes with the executive branch. So that was the reason for that. So although you all were correct in the three branches, please learn legislative, executive, judicial, because it's directly related to Article 1, Article 2, and Article 3. All right, so what are some of the things under Article 1 that the Congress is allowed to do? And anyone can try, or I can just list them off. Let me make sure I'm recording. Okay, still recording. All right, so Congress can raise your taxes, raise revenue, borrow money, declare war. So a list of things, because whenever you have a list of things, if I'm writing a multiple choice question, I'm gonna say, okay, which one is not a function of Congress? And you have to be able to pull out, okay? Commander-in-Chief, Yep, Congress is not the commander-in-chief. Or Congress does not do anything for the State of the Union address, or whatever else it says, or interpret laws. Under Article 1, which branch of government interpret laws? You will know that those scenarios do not go together, because Congress does not interpret the laws, they make the laws. So you have to look at it, look for all those keywords that align together to figure out what needs to be done. All right, so how do we propose legislation? So we're just recapping some of the things we talked about last week. How do we propose, or who can propose? What are some of the documents that are used to propose legislation? What's the most important? The bills, right? So bills are your general proposal. I want something to become law, I got to propose it in a bill. What is the next one? So you had 4 of them.
Joint resolution.
Joint resolution. Both of those have to go to the president for the president to sign for those to become law. The other 2 do not go to the president for the president to sign. What are the other 2 ways to propose legislation that do not go to the president?
Would that be concurrent resolution?
Concurrent
and simple.
And simple. Those means those are concurrent actions that's happening in both the House and the Senate, or simple resolutions, meaning one or the other one. Those particular actions do not go to the president for the president to sign. All right. So who may originate a legislation proposal? Who can propose these legislation? There are 3 entities. I know y'all thought y'all were just the president, okay?
Members of Congress.
Members of Congress, correct?
And committee.
And committees in Congress. All right, so those are your 3. I know y'all thought y'all were just gonna come and listen to Manpower Management. Check on learning. Whenever you review, whenever you study, whenever you sit down, always go over. After a while, it becomes just a flip up the pages. You look at the topic and you can talk about it. So it's redundancy. So these bills can be proposed by the president. And when does the president propose legislation?
His State of the Union.
During the State of the Union address. That is correct. So how does a bill become law? So the bill is introduced by the president, committee member, or a member or a committee. Then it is placed in the, what is it
hopper.
Placed in the hopper, correct? And then once it's placed in the hopper, it's considered by different committees, public hearings and markup. That's when you go in, you have to justify your bill, what you want, why you want it. Then the committees take action. Remember, for every part of Congress, you have a House of Representatives and you have a Senate. So once they mark up the bill and they send it back to the originator, what is the bill called once it's corrected? Make sure I don't
clean
use the
bill.
word. A clean bill. That's correct, because they cleaned it up. Again, the example I use is if you're writing an award or you're writing an evaluation, typically when you submit it, it's going to come back to you several times marked up. And then when it's marked up, you look at the errors you need to correct, you correct it, then it becomes a clean bill or clean award for you to submit. Clean bill. Then once it goes back to the House and the Senate, when either one approves the bill, what is it called? Anyone else? I know somebody been studying. Anybody else? Go ahead.
And gross bill.
Engrossed bill.
Engrossed bill. Because now it's approved, they're pushing it forward on one side. Remember, every bill must pass in one form to go forward to the president for the president to sign. And so let's say the House approved their part, the Senate approved their part, And then when they put it together, they have differences. So what is it called when the House and the Senate comes together?
The third chamber.
The third chamber, what is the other names?
Resolving difference. Conference committees.
Conference committee, that's what I was looking for. Whenever the House and the Senate comes together, it's called a conference. What is the purpose of the conference? Go ahead, Ms. Elise.
To resolve differences between the House and the Senate.
Right, because they're not going to agree. They're going to have differences on one side or the other. So when they come together, the purpose of the conference, anytime you hear the word conference in relationship to the CDFM, that is telling you that the House and the Senate has come together to resolve differences. And then once the differences is resolved and they have one bill in like form ready to go forward, it is then, what's the final step? What happens to the bill? What is it called then?
Enrolled.
It's enrolled, ready to go to the president for the president to sign for it to become law. All right. So when it gets to the president, so I'm telling the story, right? The CDFM story, like I tell people, you're telling the CDFM story or the P process. All of that is rolled up together. All right. So when it gets to the president has several options. President can approve it and sign it. Okay, no issues with this bill. The president can choose not to sign it and send it back. What is it called if the president chooses not to sign a bill and he returns it to the originator? What is that process called?
Veto.
A veto, there you go. So a veto is just, no, I don't like this, send it back. However, you do have two other options. There's a pocket veto, and there's an instance where he doesn't even need to sign it, but it still becomes law. So let's talk about the pocket veto. Since we said veto is, I don't like this bill, I send it back. What is then the difference then? What is a pocket veto? Who wants to explain that?
Pocket veto is when the Congress is not in session.
Okay, and there's another condition.
Is it no Congress, no signature from the president?
Okay, so there's no signature from the president. Congress is not in session, but there's another condition.
A 10-day period.
10 days, right? So all of this is dependent on that 10 days. So the president gets the bill, the clock starts. He has 10 days to act upon it. If he does not act upon it within 10 days and Congress is adjourned, after that 10 days, that bill will not automatically become law. Versus does not sign, but allow it to become law. Who can explain that one? Where the president choose not to sign something and it still becomes law. So then you got to know the difference between the pocket veto and the does not sign, but allows to become law. How can something still becomes law if the president doesn't sign it? Who wants to explain it?
If the Congress is in session, then it becomes law.
And he doesn't sign it. So does it automatically become law just because the Congress is not in session?
If the Congress is in session and the president doesn't sign, it becomes law.
What are we missing?
10 days.
10 days. They still got to wait. So it's not just because Congress is not in session or because Congress is in session. If Congress is in session and the president does not sign it within 10 days, then that bill automatically becomes law. So either way, you still have to wait that 10-day period for something to trigger or something to happen. All right, so there was a fifth one that we talked about. Let me see. What was the fifth one that I told you to write in? Because it's not on that page. It wasn't on that page. What was the fifth one? It's also a V.
1996 line item veto.
The 1996 line item veto. The president, up to that point, President Clinton was allowed, if they did not like a portion of the bill, they were allowed to line it out, mark it out. Then they signed the bill and the bill became law. The courts determined that it was unconstitutional for the, so I guess it was about 1998 by the time they made a decision that it was unconstitutional. If you don't like a part of the bill, the whole thing's got to go back. All right, y'all doing good. And at any point, if anybody else want to chime in and you put your hand up or you just jump in, but you're welcome to respond. All right, let's see. We talked about that. All right. So then when the president sends, also once something gets to the Congress, congressional action. So now we're switching to the budget process because it's a little bit different than a general bill. The budget request comes from the executive branch, which is the president or the press bud. It goes to Congress for Congress to review. And then once Congress resolves all their differences, then it comes back to the president for the president to sign for it to become law or the appropriation law. All right, so when the budget gets to Congress, there's certain congressional actions that take place. What is the first step that Congress has to go through in that process? Phase one is what? Congressional action. And we think about the budget. Okay, so phase one is the budget resolution process. That is a concurrent resolution process. And we said, does concurrent resolutions go to the president? What did we say in the beginning? Don't all get quiet on me at the same time.
No.
Thank you, Sergeant V. All right, concurrent means actions that happen in both the House and the Senate, but it does not go to the president. So the budget resolution process is an example of a concurrent process. I want you to be able to tie in what you learned back in the first few pages to this, because what's happening in the budget resolution process is the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, is like their resource manager. They pull all the historical data, they present it to the congressmen and women. They give them the deficit, did we have any surplus, what were the limitations on previous years, how much money did the government make? All of that is part of the budget resolution process. What is the purpose then of the budget resolution process? Now we have that historical data. Why do they go through the budget resolution process?
Which page are we on?
You're not on a page right now. We're just reviewing. We're just reviewing data from last week, information from last week. Because you cannot study by just continuing. You want to recap what you know, then you pick up with the new study for today. And Manpower won't take that long. So I wanted to go over that. All right, so in the budget resolution process, that is Congress determining the guidelines they are going to use when they look at the president's budget. Whatever limitations they're going to place on the budget, like you'll hear when you see them on the television, they're like, nope, we're not going to approve anything to do with defense, or they'll pick a topic, but they come up with the guidelines. So that is the budget resolution process. Which House and which Senate is responsible for the budget resolution process?
The House Budget Committee and the Senate Budget Committee.
All right, thank you, Ms. Phillip. The House Budget Committee and the Senate Budget Committee. And then the second phase is the authorization process. Which House and which Senate is responsible for the authorization process? That is the one that's the anomaly where it's different is the House and Senate Armed Services Committee. What is the purpose of the authorization process?
Authorized programs.
To authorize the programs. That is correct. So you go through budget resolution to come up with the guidelines, then they move on. A different House and a different Senate is responsible for the authorization process to authorize the program. It does not matter if they talk about funding in the authorization process. Does the authorization process end with going to the president for the president to sign for it to become law? Is that a yes or no?
Yes.
Yes, it does. The authorization process, because you end up with the authorization law, they have to approve the programs. That's the category of things that each agency is allowed to spend money on. And then finally, congressional action number 3 is the appropriation process. The House and Senate Appropriation Committee. It's in the name, so you should at least know the first and the third one. So there are 12 different types of appropriation. What are the 3 specific DoD-related appropriations?
O&M, RDT&E, and OPN procurement.
Those are not specific categories of appropriation. Those
Oh.
are subcategories. So go ahead.
Defense, energy, water development, and construction.
Okay, that is correct. So categories, when you talk about appropriations, what we typically use are subcategories of these. It's a defense appropriation, military construction, veterans affairs, and energy and water development. Of the 12, those are the 3 that are DoD specific or DoD related. All right, who can tell me, why does the government shut down if we do not have an appropriation law in place? So that triggers that question. And again, we're not in the book yet. We're still just recapping. Why does the government, go ahead, ma'am.
Because the budget hasn't been approved.
Okay, so it's got to be tied to something. There's a reason when the budget's not approved that the government shuts down. So let's continue in that process. The budget's not approved. Why does the government shut down? What is it tied to? So it's gotta,
Congress
Section
hasn't.
9.
yeah, I think I heard it. Article 1, Section 9. The Article 1 tells you automatically it's something to do with Congress, legislative branch. And Section 9, and I think it's like Clause 7, talks, what does it say? If you don't know none of the articles, you at least need to know why the government shuts down. All right, so what does it say in your words?
That no money shall be drawn from the treasury unless you have an appropriation.
Right, so the law says, the Constitution says under Article 1, Section 9, that you cannot take any money out of the treasury, which is the nation's bank, unless you have an appropriation law in place. Or what's the temporary appropriation law called?
The continuing resolution.
That's a continuing resolution. All right, so it kind of lead, I'm telling a story. So one topic will lead me to something else. So continuing resolution says I can't have no new starts. I'm restricted to what my rate of operation was for the previous fiscal year. It's a temporary funding and it's a temporary appropriation. Those are different terms associated with it. What if Congress, let's say I'm operating under a CR and they said I have $1 million under the CR. And then Congress comes back and appropriate 500,000. Did I commit an Anti-Deficiency Act violation, an ADA violation? I started off under the CR. They said I had $1 million. I was operating with that million. Then Congress appropriated funds and they say you only have 500,000. Was an ADA violation committed in that scenario?
No,
No. Why not? What are your thoughts?
because at the time it was lawful for you to use that money.
Perfect. Because at the time you were operating, as long as you're operating under the law at that time, those rules, that means you have not committed an ADA violation. It also means you're probably not going to get any more money and you need to cut some things out of what you plan to do for that fiscal year. So that's not an ADA violation. All right, so two things happen when Congress appropriates the money or the funding, the appropriations. The Treasury issues the Treasury warrant, notification that the law is in place, your bank account set up, and OMB begins the apportionment process. All right, so what does that look like? The apportionment process says that the agencies, such as Department of Defense, has 10 days after the appropriation law is in place to submit an SF-132 to request their apportionment. OMB apportions funds within 30 days. Then once DOD gets their apportionment, DOD issues allotments to its subordinates. All right, so that's all the recap from last week. That was just last week alone. So now we're going to move on down to manpower. How do we, everything that we do as resource managers or financial managers is got to be somewhere tied to funding. So manpower is about looking at how do we pay for personnel. All right, so now we are in the study guide, the 2020 study guide, page 1.2.1. We can start there. They give you the definition of manpower is where you tie those manpower estimates and used for budgetary purposes. Because when you request funding, you submit your budget request for your personnel, you got to be able to tie it to the money. So you can read through that. If you notice, let me point out again, and as I always stated, everything on the CDFM study or the CDFM exam is not directly in this book of module 1, 2, and 3. So you have to learn and understand exactly what's in the book to be successful. You got to be able to tell the story like I did, where you start with in the beginning, work your way throughout the process as you move along. Because if you look even on page 2.1, if you look through the learning objective, you see they talk about something called the Federal Activities Inventory Reform Act of 1998, Commercial Activities A76, OMB Circular. Those are references. So if you go to those areas, there'll be additional information there. And we'll talk about A76 and MEO and all of that later on. The knowledge checks are always good for you just to kind of throw questions, but I tell people don't sit there and focus because the exam is not going to be straightforward like this. You got to understand the processes. So on page 5 is where I'm flipping to, is in that paragraph, you have a few things in there. You got the mission of the Department of Defense, right, to provide the force to defend and provide security for our country and our allies. But it also states the Secretary of Defense has 3 military departments under it: Army, Navy, Air Force, and 20 defense agencies. And along that, because some people get confused, you got 3 military departments, but I have 5 armed services. So you got Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine, and the Space Force, which was the most recent one. What I want to point out, that last sentence in the first paragraph, the military departments are responsible for recruiting, training, man-equip, and train personnel, but operational control of those forces is assigned to your combatant commanders. You'll go more in depth in module 2 on this, but you got to understand. Priority for manpower, that's all they're telling you here. Priority for manpower goes to combatant commands. Operational chain of command, and I know I probably have some non-military minded right now, so let me make sure I explain to you. When it comes to funding, when it comes to resources, equipment, understand the combatant commands. The globe is broken down into various combat areas. And I think they have a diagram somewhere later, if not in this section in module 2. And so there's a general that's in charge of certain areas on the map. The operational chain of command runs directly from the president to the Secretary of Defense to those combatant commands. So when they need resources, if our priority is in the East and they need manpower or they need more funding, then that's where the resources is going to go, to that combatant command. So you want to hear, operational chain of command runs from the president to the SecDef to the combatant commanders. So dealing with manpower, that's why that last sentence, that statement is listed there. And you're going to see the exams are going to overlap. So just like I just told you that operational chain of command runs to the combatant commanders in module 2, you need to review and find that section in module 2 and read through it and see what it says, because one section may have more information than the other. All right, the second paragraph, United States Coast Guard is also a part of the armed forces, although it's not listed there because it does not fall under the Department of Defense. It falls under the Department of Homeland Security. So if they say, what is another armed forces that was not listed under the Department of Defense, then you can say the Coast Guard. So it is an armed forces, but it doesn't fall under DOD. It falls under the Department of Homeland Security. On page 7, the first priority. So I'm reading the first bullet. The first priority for programming manpower. So this is a repeat of exactly what was stated in the back. This is a repeat. First programming manpower is the major combatant commands based on the Joint Chiefs of Staff guidance. So since you haven't had module 2 yet, what is the function of the Joint Chiefs of Staff? Because why are we relying on their guidance? Does anyone know? Because think about it, your president is a civilian, your Secretary of Defense is a civilian, and then you have the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They are the top military advisors to the president and the SecDef. And so that is why anything military related, although the operational chain of command runs directly from the SecDef to the combatant commands, the conversation, the military translation or language is translated through those Joint Chiefs of Staff. So that's why the guidance is important. Let's see what else they say in here. Military, civilian. Okay, most of that is information that you guys can read through on your own. On page 8 on that diagram, I want to point out the Future Year Defense Program. It's 2 words. Let's see, the fourth one from the bottom. That one is also going to show up in module 2 and 3 in more detail. So you want to read through that section. The The DoD database that keeps track of all the resources necessary to accomplish a mission is called the Future Year Defense Program. So all the personnel, all the equipment that is needed to do a particular mission is listed in that Future Year Defense Program. So you can look at the definition there. On page 9, let's see. Those are pretty straightforward, so I'm not going to stop there. I'm moving on to page 11. We got a few information. So most likely anything to do with activating forces or declaring war is a function of Congress. However, on page 11, this is an exception to the policy. It's telling you that under Title 10, U.S. Code 12304, the president has certain authority to activate reserve forces. So the paragraph under that tells you there's certain conditions, and I'll read through it with you. When the president determines that it's necessary to augment the active forces for any operation or emergency, it must include threatened use of weapon of mass destruction, a terrorist attack, or a threatened terrorist attack. It says under that 10 U.S. Code, the president may authorize the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of Homeland Security for the Coast Guard without the consent of Congress in order to put those reserve forces on active duty, and he's restricted for 365 days that they can be active. The second bullet is also telling you there's another restriction. So he can activate for weapons of mass destruction, a terrorist attack, or threat of terrorist attack. He can activate any unit of the selective reserve or individual ready reserve up to 365 days, but not more than 200,000 members of the selective reserve and the IIR can be on active duty at the same time. And of that 200,000, no more than 30,000 of them can be that individual augmentee, the individual ready reserve. Does everyone understand that? I've said a mouthful. So Title 10, you have your active duty, your reserve, and your National Guard. Your active duty and your reserve fall under Title 10 U.S. Code. That's the law. If you go look up Title 10, that's where you find the information. If you're dealing with National Guard individuals, they fall under Title 32. What do DA civilians fall under? What title, what law do we fall under? If you want to know the do's and don'ts of a DA civilian. Does anyone know?
Title 5.
Title 5. So it's not on the page. This is just good to know information, because whenever you see Title 10, then you know they're talking to the active and the reserve forces. So DA civilians are covered under Title 5. So you have Title 10, Title 32, and Title 5. So page number 1 to 11 is essential to the president being allowed to activate forces. That's not in the Constitution. It's the law under Title 10 U.S. Code 12304. So 200,000, but no more than 30,000 can be from the individual ready reserve. If no questions, we're going to go on to page 1 to 13. Those terms and definition. When you see it again, it'll probably be a practical exercise. They may give you data and they say, calculate the turnover rate. Well, the only way you're going to know the fill rate, the turnover rate, is if you know the definition. So make sure that you review table 1.2.2, the full-time equivalent terminology. For instance, turnover rate says the number of employees who left a position during the past year divided by the total number of positions. That'll be your turnover rate. So in case you get information like this and they tell you to calculate it, by knowing the definition, you'll know how to calculate those terminologies. So what I wanted to point out on page 14, like you see the beginning of that paragraph, it automatically just jumped into Title V of the U.S. Code. Now, if I didn't just tell you that Title V deals with your DA civilians or your DOD civilians, you probably wouldn't have known that. So automatically eliminates your reserve forces, your active forces. This is dealing with your civilians. So what this is talking about is separation incentives. You have the buyout program up to 40,000 and or early retirement that an individual can request early retirement. So the few restrictions it has here. So what is it? VERA and VSIP is what they usually call it. So VSIP is the buyout where you can get money to retire early or leave the government, and voluntary early retirement, VERA. On the third to the last paragraph, let's see, from the third paragraph on the bottom, the Department of Defense is permitted no more than 25,000 buyout a year. That's important for you to know. Unless it does not include base alignment. That's when they're closing down a base or a post. It doesn't include, it's not limited to that 25,000. That buyout payment, the amount of money that they can give to those individuals is limited because it says the lesser of 40,000 or the individual severance pay. So it means if your severance pay is 30,000, you're going to get 30,000. If your severance pay is 50,000, you're going to get 40,000. So the limit is 40. Also in that Title V U.S. Code 9902, no, I don't say you have to memorize 9902, but make sure you know what it states. So the lesser of 40,000 or the individual severance pay, and generally, if the individual be paid from amounts available for the employee's pay, and generally, if the individual rejoins the federal government within 5 years, they have to pay that money back. Be fully repaid if the individual rejoins within 5 years. An employee accepting a buyout cannot be reemployed for 12 months. So it's saying after 12 months, yes, you can come back on, but if you come back on before the 5 years is up, you're gonna have to pay the money back. So if you wait the 6th year, you can rejoin with no issues. On page 15, it talks about now what is inherently governmental versus, again, manpower, offsetting your manpower. What are they talking about? So we're going to look at now getting into the A76 and so forth. So from there, we're going to go to page 17. OMB Circular A76. What does OMB stand for?
Office of Management and Budget.
Office of Management and Budget. Because the idea of when they throw these acronyms is that by the time you get here, you're supposed to know what they stand for. So that is why Office of Management and Budget is the resource manager for the executive branch, and we get OMB circular, that's guidance. Whenever you hear A76, that typically means you're talking about, do we do the job strictly government, or do we get contractors to offset some of these functions? So that is covered under OMB Circular A11, which is the budget, and OMB Circular A76 is where you have the different categories of what is a commercial activity. And what you're going to need to know is who maintains responsibility. All right, so commercial activity means I get someone from the private sector to do that function. Inherently governmental activity is something that only a federal employee can do. And most of these, I think, like if you think of the prisons, I think most of those jobs are inherently governmental. So A76, commercial activities, is involved. Inherently governmental, act of governing versus monetary transactions. That's straightforward information that you can read. Page 19, under this OMB again, OMB Circular 876, performance of commercial activity, talks about, establishes the policy regarding at what point are you allowed to get contractors to do the job. And I think, yeah, on page, when we get to page 21, 22, it'll go into more depth. Let's see what it says. OMB Circular 876 is designed, I'm on page 19, to empower federal managers to make sound and justifiable business. It is not designed to simply contract out all the functions. It's designed to balance the interests of the parties, make or buy cost comparison, provide a level playing field in the public and private sector, and encourage competition and choice in the management. So those three are, it is designed for the 876 to do. And now, for those who've been around for a while, most of the functions on an military installation was primarily inherently governmental. And throughout the years, then they started making some things private, like the housing on most of the installations. Actually, all the installation used to be inherently governmental. And then throughout the years, then they bid it off to a private sector. Some terms you're going to need to know on page 21 as it relates to manpower. Most of these are straightforward: conversion to contract, conversion, something you're doing in-house and you have contractors doing it, or commercial, cost comparison. Performance work statement. If you deal with contracts, you should know what that is. That's where it details exactly what needs to be done. A term that's not familiar to most is the most efficient organization. That is the title of the government structure that is used to do a job. Let's say auditing. It's either the contractor doing the audit or the government doing the audit. If it's the government, then that structure is called the most efficient organization, the MEO. Because on page 22, that chart on the top left, let me try to orient you. In the middle at the top, you see where it says the first and the next to last step before you even do a study is Congress must be notified. Because anytime you're moving, talking about funding costs, cutting costs, moving costs, and so forth, then Congress is involved. So let me go over the diagram, and then let me tell you when Congress needs to be involved. So on the left side, it says you have to request a study. Like you hear those manpower studies. I don't know if everybody's been familiar with those or been a part of that. So request a study contract, then you have an award study contract to see, is it better to do a government or contractor? You got to do a study. So when you start the study, on the left side, you see it goes either to develop the government structure, which is the MEO, or to complete a performance work statement. I've been in organizations where we had to detail everything we did. Okay, you come in, you answer how many emails, you make phone calls, you do your status of funds, it takes you 2 hours or whatever. We had to detail it in a performance work statement. Then that performance work statement is then given and solicited for contractors, and then they provide their cost. On the MEO side, you do an independent cost estimate to complete it, to see how much it's going to cost for the government to do it. Then you have a cost comparison, you have your appeals, and then Congress is notified on the decision, whether we continue to keep it in-house or we give it to the government. Any question on anything I've covered so far? Feel like I need a pause. Yes. All right, I don't hear any questions. All right, so if you look on, starts on that one, but page 24, on the very bottom, the length of the process. So what that's telling you, when you have the cost comparison between the performance work statement or the contractor, and you have the in-house, that streamlined process. Under the streamlined process, it typically takes a 12-month for a standard competition. It may be extendable to 18 months. And there are instances, exception to policies, where it can be streamlined. Like, for example, before the wars kicked off in Iraq, it used to only be those MP soldiers, military police soldiers, on the gates of most of the installations that I'm familiar with. And then once the war kicked off, then they had to streamline the process, because I think they went to contractor first for individuals to come check your ID card when you come in the gate. And then at some point they went to GS security guards and so forth and so forth. So a lot of that was streamlined based on requirements at that time. So when does Congress have to be notified? Congress is notified on page 1.2.25 under DODI, that's the DOD, so the DOD instruction 4100.33. It says, if you're doing a study and it involves 46 or more DOD civilian personnel, Congress must be notified before you do that study. So this goes back to page 22, that diagram, when it says Congress is notified first and second to last, only if these conditions are in place. The DOD shall notify the USDPNR. What does USDPNR stand for? No takers? USDPNR. What does USD stand for?
Undersecretary of Defense.
Okay, so you got the Undersecretary of Defense. So that's the section that's responsible for notifying the Congress. Undersecretary of Defense, Personnel and Readiness. Don't make it hard. Anytime you see an acronym, you need to know what it means, because it may come back up again. Personnel, so I'm writing it in my book to make sure I keep asking. Personnel and Readiness. So anything to do with manpower, think about it. There's a set in the DOD, it's a responsibility. All manpower is USD PNR, Personnel and Readiness. Of any such intent, at least 5 working days before the congressional notification. So we gotta let them know before we let Congress know. The cost comparison process begins on the date of congressional notification. So you let Congress know, and then you can start the process. Right, nothing else there. And then in module 2, module 1, competency 2, manpower, they throw some ethics in there. Then fiscal law accounts for the majority of the questions. So ethics begins on page 26, but we're going to go on page 27, where it talks about gifts and from outside sources. The only one on this page I want to point out to you is the second set of bullets. The first one is talking about, can I, as a government employee, accept gifts from a contractor, an outside source, and it says, yes, I can, but the value of that one gift cannot be more than $20. So if that contractor gives me a pen, the pen cannot cost or be valued more than $20. And annually from the same contractor, I am limited to $50. So if he gives me a pen for 20, he gives me a pencil for another 20, and he wants to give me another pen again for 20, I cannot accept that third one because now it's going to push me over the $50 annually. So that's January to December. Do I
So
have
no courtside seats to a Lakers game?
no. No. I mean,
Nosebleed?
do they do it? Do people do it? Yeah, but you're good. You're getting in that area, and all you got to do is do something where somebody that you work with don't like, and those are the kind of things they're going to point out. So, yes, no courtside seat. Again, unless you can show, that's why they always say go to your ethics lawyer, because some people, yeah, you do know famous people. Make sure you have something in writing. Hey, they're not giving me this ticket or this plane trip because I work for this organization. It's because we went to high school together. We're friends. Make sure you get something from your legal folks already signed and accepted, because that $50, like I said, most of the time when these things comes out is because you're nasty to one of your coworkers and they know what you do, so they report you. All right. Gifts to employees, page 28. It says that I'm limited gifts other than cash that are valued at no more than $10. What this is talking about is a subordinate buying a gift or contributing to a gift to a supervisor or superior. So I don't think it mentions if you're higher. Did I see a hand? I'm sorry. It looked like you took it off before I could look up.
Yeah,
Was
so I
there
had
a question?
a question
ahead.
about that. So one year, like a holiday party. So there were a whole bunch of gifts or stuff that was being raffled. Big screen TVs, PlayStation 5s, blah blah blah. So I bought about $151 tickets, raffle tickets for the stuff. My entire table won everything. Those gifts, now those gifts probably exceeded a couple $1,000s, but they won them off of the $1 raffle tickets that I bought. And some of the other tables were giving me the side eye because I bought so many tickets. Bought them for myself. I just didn't win.
Right. That's a little different. So for the most part, when I hear this gift and the $10 limitation is, let's say Colonel so-and-so is leaving. My supervisor is leaving, and you know how they come around and they say, would you like to donate? Well, most of the time is you're highly recommended to donate. You feel kind of pressured to donate to the cause, but know that you're limited to 10. If you give more, that's on you. But ethically, if you're subordinate and you're putting in a gift for your superior, you don't have to give no more than $10. So you don't have to feel guilty because somebody else throwing a 20 or 50. Hey, $10 is your limit. So I think yours is a little different because you weren't giving it to one person. So when you bought the raffle ticket, you gave them like the dollar ticket is what you're saying? Each person like a
Yes.
dollar ticket, right,
And,
right. So,
and they were lucky enough to win.
right, and they just happened to win. So that's a little bit different from what I understand here.
What about, I have a question.
Yes.
We had an event at the job for a cookout, and they asked everyone to donate $25. Um, is that acceptable? And then we also had an incident where we lost one of our coworkers, and they also, but in this case, they only asked for a donation. So we donated what we wanted to at that point. Is the $10 limit value?
Right, because the $10 is for a gift specifically for somebody.
Okay.
I'm not an ethics lawyer, but that's how it was always explained to me and us doing the fiscal law and sitting through fiscal law training is the $10 is usually a gift to a person. And again, you limit the gift because again, if you have 3 employees that work for you and one of them is like, you know what, I'm gonna put $100 in because I love my supervisor. And then everybody else is like $10, then you kind of, what they say, perception. Okay, well, why would you be putting in $100? You know, so I think to eliminate all of that for subordinates, gift. So the key there is a gift to the individual, different from the cookout, because we have those, or what they call organization day, where they have to buy a certain amount of food or so forth. So that's different. That's for the event for everybody. So that's not necessarily a gift for a person. Hopefully that cleared that up for all of you.
Yes, thank you.
All right, you're welcome. All right, so 2930, that's about financial disclosure. Depending on the position you're in, you may need to disclose certain information. Like I said, you may have to get with the ethics lawyer to determine if I don't know anybody famous, or so if you know anybody famous or in a high position and you know you're going to be interacting with them, you may want to do some type of disclosure. Are you in business with somebody that's not part of the government? Those are financial disclosures you may want to make up front, and make sure that you're not in business with someone that you're actually working with on the government side doing business. So those are the instances where you may have to do financial disclosure or your position. Page 31 at the bottom, seeking other employment. Executive branch employees, and yes, we are executive branch employees, may not participate in any particular government matter that will affect the financial interests of a personal entity in which they are seeking employment. An employee is considered to be seeking employment when you're trying to, so that's basically trying to work with a contractor, like kind of, you do business on the government side with that contractor, and then you're figuring, okay, I'm getting ready, I want to leave the government and come work for you. When you start those negotiations, you're getting in that gray area. Ooh, fire alarm. Okay, I guess I have to close. Let me make sure. Yep. All right, well, I'm gonna have to cut it off today. We got a fire alarm going off. All right. So I think we were almost done. Let me get out of this building. We only got a few more pages, and I'll recap anything I didn't cover today. All right. Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Yeah, I gotta
Thank
get
you.
out.
Good luck.
Let me stop.
Thank you. Bye.